To that breaking story, the former Scottish Secretary Alistair Carmichael has told the BBC that he made an error of judgment during the general election campaign. He admitted leaking a controversial letter about the SNP leader Nicola Sturgeon, accusing her of wanting David Cameron to stay in Downing Street. Well, we can hear now from the SNP leader Nicola Sturgeon, who joins me from Glasgow. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
He's apologised. Is that enough?
Well, I accept his apology. He's written to me saying that he apologises for leaking the memo and also that he accepts the contents of the memo were not correct. So I accept that apology. I actually think the bigger issue now for Alistair Carmichael is why he didn't simply come clean on this during the general election campaign when this story first broke. He could have admitted leaking it, then apologised and allowed the voters in his constituency to vote in possession of all of the facts. Instead, he, when questioned about it, said he knew nothing about it. He allowed a leak investigation to be undertaken and, of course, allowed voters to go to the polls without knowing the full facts of the situation. And only today, when the leak inquiry has been about to point the finger at him, has he confessed to being the one who leaked this information. So I think, while I can accept his apology, the people perhaps who have most right to expect an apology from Alistair Carmichael are his constituents.
I'll come to that in a moment. Did you suspect him at any point?
I didn't know who was responsible for this. Of course, as the Secretary of State, as the occupant of the Scotland office, where this memo was clearly leaked from, was on my list of possible suspects. But I did welcome the fact that Sir Jeremy Haywood agreed to undertake this investigation, and I very much welcome the robust and thorough way in which that investigation was undertaken. It must be one of the few leak inquiries that has actually successfully identified the person responsible for the leak. And I'm glad we've got to the bottom of this, not just because it vindicates my position, but I hope it also throws a spotlight on dirty tricks that should have no place in an election campaign. I believe as a politician that we should fight elections on the basis of our ideas and our policies, our values, our vision for the country, not on the basis of smears and dirty tricks. And I hope there are lessons learned from this episode.
How damaging was it to you, do you think, at the time?
As it turned out, not at all, because very quickly, of course, it was established that what I was alleged to have said to the French ambassador, I didn't say. I was very clear I didn't say it, and perhaps more crucially, the French ambassador was clear that I hadn't said it. So people didn't have to just take my word for it. And I accept I'm a politician and we were in the heat of an election campaign. Maybe people wouldn't have been happy just simply to accept my word. But the French ambassador was very clear that I hadn't said what I was alleged to have said. So the truth of the matter in that respect was established very, very quickly after the story broke. What was then the question was who leaked this and why did they leak it? Today we've got to the bottom of that, and I'm glad, and I hope we can, sort of accept now that these kind of dirty tricks just have no place in a campaign.
Do you accept the Cabinet Office report that the civil servant effectively got lost in translation, that it was written down in truth as far as they felt it?
Yeah, I'm prepared to accept that. As I say, the inquiry was robust and thorough. I can't accept one part of it and not accept another part of it. So, I'm very clear, and the French ambassador is clear that what I was alleged to have said, I didn't say. But I'm prepared to accept the civil service who wrote this memo wrote it in good faith and thought that they had heard that. Interestingly, and this was something that perhaps wasn't as commented on at the time as it should have been, the civil servant who wrote the memo, in the memo, actually said that they thought it may have been lost in translation. So clearly, the civil servant who wrote this memo, at the time they wrote it, had doubts about its veracity and accuracy. Now, you could say perhaps that means they shouldn't have written it, but nevertheless, I'm prepared to accept that that part of it was in good faith. What wasn't in good faith, of course, was the leaking of it. That was a clear attempt at dirty tricks, and I just don't think that kind of behaviour should have any place in an election campaign.
Dirty tricks motivated by what?
And motivated by a desire to damage the SNP. The SNP was riding high in the polls, the Liberal Democrats were struggling in the polls, and this was purely driven by the motivation to damage the SNP by damaging me as leader of the SNP. It didn't succeed, and I think it has backfired on Alistair Carmichael and the Liberal Democrats. But I'll go back to the issue I was making earlier on. I'm not. I don't think I was an injured party in the sense that it did any harm, but I was clearly intended to be the injured party. Alistair Carmichael has apologised to me and I accept his apology. But I think the people who have got the right to feel pretty aggrieved tonight are the voters in Mr Carmichael's constituency who went to the polls and voted for him on the basis that they thought he had nothing to do with this, because that's what he said during the election campaign. Turns out that wasn't true, and that not only did he know something about it, he was the person who leaked the document.
So, First Minister, what should Alistair Carmichael do now?
But I think he should reflect on his position. I think he should consider his position. You know, in 2010, Alistair Carmichael had a majority of 10,000. 2 weeks ago, his majority was less than 1,000. Now, we can never know whether, had voters known the truth, the outcome of the election would have been different. There's no way of answering that question. But I think it's reasonable to say that it is at least possible that had voters in his constituency known that he had engaged in dirty tricks of this nature during the campaign, then they might have voted differently.
Well, so should he step down?
I think he should consider his position, yes. But it's a matter, ultimately it's a matter for him, it's not a matter for me. But you know, his electorate, his constituents voted without being in full possession of all of the facts of this situation, and that was entirely down to how Alistair chose to handle this.
Nicola Sturgeon, First Minister, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you.